Good afternoon, folks. Welcome back to the farm. Been kind of vacant for a few days here, just trying to get ahead of the rush and what's going on in the world, and everything's kind of going back to normal, but some stuff's not, and it's been kind of hard to stay on track with keeping up on YouTube videos. So I had this bright idea the other day that I was actually going to record a podcast episode while I was out on the road, and recorded it, attached footage to it. It was like, it actually took me longer. It actually took me longer to put that video together, do all the editing and everything, and then exporting it. So once I exported it, turned out the audio quality didn't match up, and it was really, really poor. So disappointing result on that one. But it was all about making smart investments on your homestead. And it was 27 minutes of glory. I was actually pretty proud of myself when I was done. But needless to say, the end of the project did not work out. So today you're going to get the Reader's Digest version of that, because I by no means can remember verbatim 27 minutes of rambling of what I had to say about not spending money like a fool on the homestead. So hopefully you don't mind listening to the pigs eat while we chat about this. Now, the biggest one hands down right off the get-go here is water. When you're making investments in a piece of property, you're going to want to do your homework on water. So how do you get water to it? Reason being the water is so important is because it really formulates the lifeblood of your homestead, right? So if you're looking at a piece of land in a specific area, it's real easy to just drive up the road, talk to the neighbors, you know, see what they have for a water well, see how the depth is, the quality of the water, what their water well reports come back looking like, how often do they have to shock chlorinate it, is there iron issues, is there sodium issues, any bacteria problems. And that's not going to be, you know, gospel by any means. Your well on your adjacent property very well may differ, but it'll give you an idea, rough idea. The other thing you should talk to is water well drillers. They are an expert, obviously subject matter expert, specifically on the area you're looking. And you can kind of shop around a little bit. Well, not really shopping because you're not paying them, you're just consulting with them at that point in time. But you know, some of them will just say, yeah, whatever, we poke a hole. And then other ones will be able to give you more specific information about it. And really you're going to want to go to the person that's going to give you some more specific information, because the guy that's just willing to spot a hole and leave, well, I mean, he might just take 15 grand out of your pocket and you'll be left there with a duster essentially. So the other thing I want to talk about was shelters. So there's a lot of questions out there regarding what type of shelters animals require. Now, most definitely, depending on where you are, you're going to require a variety of different types of shelters. So we're here in northern Alberta. We get some very extreme summer temperatures. Right now, we're just coming out of, you know, second wave of a massive heat wave, record-breaking heat wave. But in the wintertime, we get some very polar extremes. You know, we've seen minus 50 last winter. We see minus 50 for a couple of weeks. So the question becomes, well, what do we do? Do we need to build like heated, insulated shelters? Do we need to run power to these things? And the reality is, more than likely not. In fact, this is our pig shelter here. It's all made out of reclaimed pallets, OSB, and tin. We didn't pay a dime for that. That's just time, essentially, just time to put it together. And the pigs just love it. They really do. Same with the sheep. The sheep, we have, this is a 28-foot structure made out of entirely reclaimed materials. The only cost we had was the tin, and I bought reclaimed tin off a guy by trading them for a flat of beer. So they don't need anything complicated. They do need a place to get out of the rain, and they need a place to get out of the snow and the wind and, you know, things that can obviously drive the cold into their bones. But do they need it insulated? Well, in some cases they might. Sheep, definitely not. Sheep need the air to move. They don't want it to be windy, but they need to be well ventilated. Chickens, very similarly, they need to be good. They need it to be insulated, but they need lots of ventilation, because the humidity can wreak havoc in a chicken house. Pigs are pretty carefree, and like I said, this is just a standard pallet shelter. You give them a few forkfuls of hay or straw in there in the wintertime and they'll bed down. They've got a huge fat layer on them. They'll be happy as a pig in straw. So you don't need to get, you know, the Taj Mahal built for these things. Now, if you are so inclined that you want to heat one of these structures, you have to remember, especially if you're dealing with, maybe not this, but you know, a lot of people, they use old grain sheds or things like old sheds in some way, shape or form, try to insulate them and then heat them. These things aren't built to code. They aren't meant to hold, you know, massive amounts of air. They're meant to breathe, essentially. And so if you're gonna run a heat lamp, or you're gonna run a space heater, or you're gonna run a kerosene heater, you're gonna have to expect that these things are gonna just hemorrhage heat out in one way, shape or form or the other. And obviously you're gonna see the result of that in your power bill. And worst case scenario, because these things aren't built to code, a lot of the heaters, you know, they'll be running overtime. It's quite often you deal with a huge fire hazard inside some of these shelters. Now, can you afford to lose your shed? Probably not. But can you afford to lose your shed and your entire flock of chickens? Likely, most definitely not, right? So don't overcomplicate things when it comes to chicken shelters, animal shelters, and things like that. Just make sure, yeah, it's waterproof and it's windproof. And with certain types of animals, yeah, they're gonna want some insulation, but they don't need a ton of heat. Now, when we talk about, we get to minus 50 here. Now, if it's insulated in our chicken house, but still ventilated, can we keep it warm in the chicken house without running a heater or like a heat lamp or something like that? Absolutely. So we use a deep litter method. Now, a lot of people, they messaged me last winter when I started making videos about the deep litter method and saying, I'm trying this and it's not working. And my number one question to them back every single time is, when did you start building your deep litter? So they watched the video in November and then they immediately started doing it. So if you're starting deep litter from when, you know, it's frozen already in your chicken house and the chicken poops and it's just frozen chicken poop and frozen pine shavings on the floor, it's not going to work. Now, so what we do, we start this now. We only clean our chicken house out once a year. So here we are in July, we're starting building layers, right, strata inside the chicken house now, so that it's slowly starting to compost. There's microbial activity happening on the floor of the chicken house now, so that when it does get cold, all of that stuff is there working for you to heat the chicken house. And we've seen, surprisingly, upwards of 50 degrees Celsius differential from outside in the snow to inside the chicken house. You two need to get along. So yeah, so don't overcomplicate it. Honestly, don't run a space heater in your chicken house unless you want the fire department to show up. And it'd be traumatic for the chickens, it'd be traumatic for you. It's not a good idea. So now, outside of the chicken house, let's get outside and talk about fencing. So one of the things I see quite often is somebody comes out with the question, well, you know what, I had an impulse buy and I bought all these goats and now I brought them home and I can't keep them in. I've got a barbed wire fence or I've got a wood panel fence and I just can't keep them in. Where can I get fencing for cheap? And I will say, and trust me on this one, because I've learned this lesson and I hopefully you learn from me rather than having to learn for yourself. Don't cheap out on fencing. Just don't do it. What you'll end up doing is just teaching all your significant other all the words that they didn't realize you knew when you're chasing the goats around the neighbor's yard, essentially. So what you're going to want to do, especially when it comes to fencing and livestock, is invest the most amount of money that you possibly can in quality fencing, because otherwise you're just going to build an awful lot of character very quickly the hard way. And that can quickly steal your passion for homesteading, let me tell you. So let's talk for a minute about not spending money, or at least not spending as much as you have to spend by any means. One of the first questions that comes up when people get out into the country, whether it's an acreage, a homestead, a farm, is when are we getting a tractor? And how big of a tractor do we need? And what's really the price range that we should look to spend? And that is totally unique to each individual user. But I will say, do you need a tractor? Well, let's look at the frequency that you need to move heavy stuff, the volume of heavy stuff you need to move, and the availability of rental equipment or borrowed equipment in your area that perhaps you could take advantage of. So I see lots of people, they get an acreage and they immediately go to, I need a 40 horse John Deere tractor, and they run down to, the city and they buy one, whether it's, new or lightly used, but you're looking at a $40,000 tractor. Before it's, you've even made a dime, before you've sold a dozen eggs, you've got this $40,000 tractor that you're making payments on. it's new, therefore it's got a lot of electronics in it, and if it breaks, you're dead in the water, right? Because I mean, unless you're a heavy duty mechanic that's really tech savvy, you're probably not fixing that thing. So we recognize that early on. I'm not tech savvy. I'm not mechanically inclined. In fact, the only thing my dad ever taught me to do mechanically was tap it with a hammer, and if it didn't start, well, I guess you're screwed. So what we ended up doing was that yellow tractor over there, that's a Massey 40 industrial. It's like late 60s, early 70s era. It's got a Perkins 3-cylinder gas engine in it. There's really only 3 things that can go wrong with it. So either it's not getting air, it's not getting ignition, or it's not getting fuel. And that's really simple. That tractor cost us $3,300. So I mean right there, I got like 36 and a half grand burning a hole in my pocket I can spend on parts before. I mean, I could build 2 of them tractors brand new with parts before I'd ever have to make a single payment. And it provides all the hydraulic power we need, gets us around the yard. We do pound all our posts with it. We're able to grade the driveway, do all the heavy lifting that we really need to do without having that massive payment hanging over our head. So if you've got an old piece of equipment that's still in decent shape, that requires minimal amount of work, and if it does require work, it's simple enough to work on, why not spend less money? You know, I see lots of folks that are looking to buy stuff in the 90s to the early 2000s even. That's on the more expensive side, but it's also higher on the failure side. So it's just getting into the age of electronics, but it's also right there around the age of, well, I'm just going to break because it's Tuesday and you really can't do anything to fix me kind of era, right? Whereas this stuff in the 1960s, 1970s was right at the end of the I'm just going to run forever kind of era, right? So I'm a lot more comfortable with that tractor than I am that's probably 30 years newer. So let's talk about livestock again for a second. So what a huge goal for a lot of homesteaders is to get their place to a point where they can actually quit their job and be completely self-reliant on the homestead, and that can be their sole source of income. So there's always unique ways to kind of find sources of income on the farm, and lots of folks are asking, well, how much are we charging for eggs and things like that? And that's a huge bone of contention for a lot of small producers, because somebody's undercutting them or somebody's overselling, or what does that look like? And the big piece of advice I have for anybody that's homesteading and is concerned about the fair price for eggs is, don't worry about what your neighbor's doing, because if they're selling them for $2 or $3 and you think their cost is 4 or 5 and they're losing money, you know what, they're enjoying themselves. And if they get to a point where they're actually losing money, it's not sustainable, chances are they're going to have their chickens for sale, and they're probably going to give all their customers to you down the road anyways. Now, if they are able to make it a profit at the $2, $3 market, I would highly suggest you go look at what they're doing and see if that aligns with really what you want to accomplish on your homestead. In fact, you might find it doesn't, right? I did a video recently on the fair price to charge for a dozen eggs, and what we identified is, if you were to actually measure apples to apples what you're producing here on your homestead versus what's available for sale in the grocery store, that you can argue all day long with the people that think they can get their eggs cheaper at Walmart, right? Sure you can, but you're not going to get the same quality of product. If you're to go to the store and you're going to buy the free range organic eggs that you're producing here on your homestead, you're going to be paying $7 to $8 a dozen, which is a lot more than the $5 or $4 a dozen that the average small producer is just asking for, which is it's not breaking the bank by any means. So if you get in one of those people that you're just butting heads with them and you can't get it through to them, and they're like, well, I can get it for cheaper at the grocery store, wish them a nice day and move on, because you're never going to change that person's attitude. They just want eggs for cheap, and they don't understand the nutritional benefits. They don't understand the health of the chicken and all of that stuff that happens in the background. So now let's talk ease of production, cost of production versus actual return on investment. So what's the easiest animal to raise? Well, I would probably say if you're raising wiener pigs, if you're just getting a couple, like we get wiener pigs from the neighbors and we raise them over the period of 6 months, it costs us about $350 to raise each pig for feed, and then just your time on top of that. And market value for pork is right now it's actually quite high, but it's probably one of your cheaper meats. So it's easier to produce, lower return on your investment. So there's that. Beef, Beef is something that is a little bit more intensive. If you're calving out, quite often the cows are going to need some help with calving, and you're waiting a couple years probably to get, you know, something sizable enough to butcher, unless you're pouring the grain to them. So that requires quite a bit of intensive feeding and feeding cost. Honestly, at the end of the day, and I mean, I know I preach chickens and I'm a chicken guy, so I'm a little bit biased, but I mean, we have 70 meat chickens out, or 60 meat chickens out here, because we already butchered a bunch. But as long as you're willing to get up every morning and just move that chicken tractor ahead 10 feet or 12 feet or however long your chicken tractor is, and give them a couple scoops of feed, it's very low intensity for labor. You've got one bad day on the farm where you butcher all of them at once, kind of thing. You can usually pick a couple of days if you really wanted to space it out. But they'll produce a massive amount of, you know, lean protein, and they're getting pure sunshine, right? They're just grazing grass. 25% of their diet is grass, and so you'll notice when you do butcher them, actually the meat is way more flavorful. The fat is a lot better for you. It's got a lot more amino acids in it. Overall, is a lot more nutrient dense than the saltwater and grain-fed chicken that you get at Costco or Walmart or one of these places. It just comes through an industrial processing facility. So my money is on meat chickens all day long. Now we keep pigs and we keep sheep here. You know, obviously we want to have a little bit of selection. Sheep, I don't know if that's a winning battle or not. I mean, that's one thing that's more of a hobby for me, because I have, you know, a unique attachment to sheep from growing up in the UK. But the reality is, I mean, that's a niche market. That's not the easiest to break into in northern Alberta, because I mean, we're in beef country here, right? And the alternative is pork or chicken, and nobody there's not too many people that open the fridge and are like, man, I got a hankering for some lamb chops right now. So you're catering to a niche market there. But pork and chicken, beef, you really can't go wrong as far as actual conversion to feed ratio. Chicken's your number one. Very low cost, very low input, and a high rate of return. So it's a smart move for the homestead. So now, speaking of rate of return on the homestead, if you really want to achieve something, you got to put in hours, right? This is a lot about sacrifice and commitment, and with that comes the risk of burnout. So it's important that you do take a moment to rest, to breathe, to recover from all the work that you put in. And yesterday, because we haven't been able to secure feed locally, we drove to Teepee Creek and filled up the cattle trailer with 120 round bales, and I actually got heat exhaustion. I just had to tap out. It was too much for me. Sit under a cool fan, drink lots of water, and just sleep for like 10 hours. Otherwise, that'd have been a bad way. So it's time for me to just take a break for a few days here. So those that watch regularly will know our camper trailer usually sits there where my pickup is in front of the house, and it's not there. So what we've decided to do is haul that down to Saskatoon Lake, just a few miles down the road, and have a couple of days away. I'll come back and do chores in the morning, kind of thing. But we're just gonna get some R&R, some family time that's I feel anyways, is well needed and hopefully well deserved. So I'm gonna let you go for now. I hope you have a fantastic weekend. We'll talk to you next week.